Hey everybody, and welcome back to Sip and Talk. We're diving deep into Taiwan's political scene today, and let me tell you, it's a wild ride.
Yeah, no kidding.
We've got Taiwanese citizens going head-to-head with pro-China politicians, a spy scandal that could rival a Hollywood blockbuster, and a budget freeze that has the whole world on edge.
It's like a political thriller unfolding in real time, and it's fascinating to see how these events, which seem totally separate at first glance, are actually all connected. They provide this really interesting window into Taiwan's ongoing fight to stay independent while facing increasing pressure from China.
It's a lot to unpack, so let's get started. First up, we've got this wave of recall petitions that are mainly targeting legislators from the KMT party, which is seen as pro-China. Over 52 petitions.
Well, yeah, over 52.
That's insane. It's like the whole island is making its voice heard loud and clear.
It definitely shows how frustrated people are becoming. This is where the Bluebird movement of 2024 comes in. It was fueled by worries about China's growing influence, and this movement basically wants to hold these pro-China politicians accountable.
So they're basically saying if you're playing for the other team, you're out of here.
Exactly. And what's really fueling this movement is this fear that the KMT's pro-China stance is weakening Taiwan's defenses, especially with China getting more and more assertive. People are genuinely worried that the KMT is putting its relationship with Beijing ahead of Taiwan's safety and security.
So it's not just about political differences, it's about national security. It's about Taiwan's very survival. But these recall petitions have a long road ahead of them.
Right. It's
not just as simple as saying you're fired.
Oh, definitely not. There are a lot of hoops to jump through to actually remove these legislators. Like, first, they need to collect signatures from at least 10% of the voters in every district. And then on top of that, they have to win a majority vote in the actual recall election with at least 25% of eligible voters participating.
So it's like David versus Goliath, but with way more red tape. But wait, there's more. We've also got espionage in the mix now. A former KMT legislator was just arrested, accused of spying for China. Talk about a plot twist.
Right. This is where things get really interesting, and I think this arrest is probably just the beginning. Think about it. There are reports of Chinese special police entering Taiwan disguised as tourists. It's kind of spooky how similar that is to what Russia did before invading Ukraine, which raises some serious red flags.
It's like something straight out of a spy movie, but the stakes are way higher than any movie.
Oh, for sure.
And this all ties back to China's United Front strategy, right?
Yeah.
It's like they're playing this long game trying to influence Taiwanese politics and society from the inside.
Exactly. It's not just about showing off their military might. They're using a more subtle approach. They're trying to win over people's hearts and minds, or at least stir up enough trouble to weaken Taiwan internally. We saw a similar tactic used with that Taiwanese influencer Chen Boyuan back in 2024. He got exposed for creating pro-China content under Beijing's direction. It just goes to show you that influence can come in many forms.
Yeah. It's like they're playing chess, but with real people's lives. It's messed up.
And it's not just limited to politics and social media. They're targeting businesses, universities, even religious groups. It's a multi-pronged approach with the goal of making Taiwan more dependent on China and less likely to resist their influence.
So it's like the whole boiling the frog slowly strategy. And to top it all off, we had this major budget freeze to throw into the mix.
Yeah.
The KMT and the Taiwan People's Party joined forces to freeze a big chunk of the 2025 defense budget.
Yeah.
We're talking military equipment, submarine development, overseas training, all put on hold. What impact could this possibly have?
Well, this is where things start to get really worrisome. This budget freeze could seriously hurt Taiwan's ability to get the weapons they need from the U.S. and weaken their defenses, especially when China is rapidly upgrading their own military. It's not a good situation to be in at all.
Yeah, that's not a good look, especially with China already right there breathing down their necks.
Yeah.
And, you know, the international community is taking notice, too. There was a Reuters report saying this freeze could disrupt arms deals with the U.S., and the U.S. Defense Department has been pretty vocal about China's increasing military power. Feels like the whole world's holding its breath, watching to see what's going to happen next.
Yeah, and it's not just about the weapons themselves either. This budget freeze affects training programs and intelligence gathering, basically making it harder for Taiwan to prepare for any potential conflict. It's a risky move that's making a lot of people nervous, both in Taiwan and internationally.
So we've got internal political struggles, external pressure from China, and now a budget freeze that's raising eyebrows all over the world. It's more complicated than a soap opera at this point.
Yeah.
I think we need to pause here for a minute, though, and really dig into the potential consequences of this budget freeze.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. What are the stakes here? Stay with us because we'll be right back to explore just how high those stakes really are. Okay, we're back and ready to dig deeper into this whole Taiwanese political situation. Before the break, we were talking about the budget freeze and how it could impact Taiwan's ability to defend itself. It's a pretty big deal, right? It's not like they can just hop online and order some weapons on Amazon.
Right. We're not talking about ordering takeout here. Getting military equipment is a whole different ballgame. We're talking about sophisticated fighter jets, anti-ship missiles, cyber defense systems, stuff that takes time to acquire and get up and running, and this freeze throws a wrench in that whole process.
I'm sure China's loving this.
Yeah.
What are some of the potential consequences here? Like, what's the worst-case scenario?
Well, in a worst-case scenario, this budget freeze makes Taiwan vulnerable, and China could definitely try to exploit that. They might ramp up those gray zone tactics, like messing with those undersea cables that connect Taiwan to the internet. Can you imagine a sudden internet blackout in Taiwan? It would be chaos. Or they could start doing more military exercises near Taiwan, basically simulating a blockade or even an invasion.
Okay, that's pretty terrifying. It feels like China's testing the water, seeing how far they can go without starting an all-out war.
Exactly. And this budget freeze sends a really confusing message to China, which might actually encourage them to take even bigger risks. It's almost like they're saying, hey, our defenses are down, come on in.
Yikes. But let's try not to get too pessimistic here. What about the other side of this? If the recall efforts work out and they can stop China's spying, wouldn't that make Taiwan stronger?
Oh, absolutely. If those recall petitions are successful, it sends a really strong message both within Taiwan and to the rest of the world. It shows that the Taiwanese people are serious about protecting their democracy and standing up to China's influence. It could also help the ruling party by letting them put stronger defense policies in place.
So it's a high-stakes gamble. If it works out, it could be a total game changer. But if it doesn't, let's not even go there.
Right. And it's important to remember that Taiwan isn't alone in this. The whole world is watching this unfold. The U.S. and its allies, especially Japan and the Philippines, they're all really invested in Taiwan's security.
Why do they care so much? I mean, Taiwan's a small island, right?
Geographically speaking, yes, but strategically, Taiwan is super important. It's like a keystone in what's called the First Island Chain, which is this line of islands that stretches from Japan all the way down to the Philippines. And this chain is super important for controlling shipping routes and projecting power in the region.
So if China takes over Taiwan, they basically control a major strategic choke point.
Exactly. It would be a huge victory for China and a major loss for the U.S. and its allies. It would totally shift the balance of power in the entire Indo-Pacific region.
Wow, so it's not just about Taiwan's fate here. This is about the future of the whole region. No pressure, Taiwan. How are all these recent events, the recall efforts, the spy arrest, the budget freeze, how are they affecting Taiwan's relationship with the U.S.?
Well, it's kind of a mixed bag, to be honest. On one hand, the U.S. has been a strong supporter of Taiwan. They've given them weapons and diplomatic backing. They've even said outright that they would defend Taiwan if China attacked. But if Taiwan seems internally divided and can't really defend itself, it could make the U.S. hesitant.
So the U.S. might be thinking, if Taiwan won't even fight for itself, why should we?
Exactly. The U.S. might be less willing to support Taiwan if it looks like they're not even trying to defend themselves. They might start to focus on other allies in the region that seem more dependable.
That would be a big blow to Taiwan, both strategically and symbolically. It would be like getting ghosted by your best friend. But what if the opposite happened? What if those recall efforts are successful and Taiwan takes a strong stance against China's influence?
Well, that would show the U.S. that Taiwan is a serious partner worth supporting. It could lead to an even stronger relationship between the two countries, including more military cooperation and economic partnerships.
So Taiwan's walking a tightrope here. They have to balance their own internal politics with all this pressure from China, and they have to try to keep a good relationship with both the U.S. and China at the same time. It's a tough spot to be in.
For sure. And the choices they make over the next few months could have a lasting impact on their future. We've talked about the risks, the potential consequences, but this is also a story of resilience and determination.
You're right. Even with all this pressure from China, the Taiwanese people are fighting for their democracy, their identity, their right to decide their own future. It's actually pretty inspiring.
It really is. They're up against a powerful adversary, but they're not giving up, and that's something to admire.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've covered a lot today. We've looked at the recall efforts, the spy games, the budget freeze, and the complicated relationship between Taiwan, China, and the U.S. It's a lot to process, but I think it's safe to say that Taiwan is at a crossroads right now. The decisions they make in the next few months will have a ripple effect throughout the region and beyond. Wow. So we've really dug deep into this whole situation: recall petitions, spying, a frozen defense budget, and Taiwan's balancing act between China and the U.S. What do you think is the biggest takeaway from all of this?
Honestly, what strikes me the most is how intertwined everything is. Taiwan's internal politics, its relationship with China, its ties to the U.S., it's all connected. And the decisions they make over the next few months, especially about those recall efforts and the defense budget, are going to have a huge impact. They could either lead to more stability or push the region closer to conflict.
Yeah, it really shows how what happens in Taiwan doesn't just stay in Taiwan. It affects global trade, regional security, even the future of democracy. It's pretty intense stuff. But before we get too lost in the weeds of geopolitics, I want to go back to something we talked about earlier: Taiwan's resilience. Even with all this pressure, they're not giving up.
Absolutely. That's what gives me hope. The Taiwanese people are showing a strong will to protect their way of life, their values. Those recall efforts really show how active and engaged they are in their democracy and how they're not going to let outside forces decide their future. Even if some politicians seem unsure, the people are standing their ground.
It's like a modern-day David and Goliath story. But instead of slingshots, they're using social media campaigns, cyber defense, and maybe even some good old-fashioned protests. Who knows what creative strategies they'll come up with next?
Right. And it's not just about resisting China's influence either. It's about building their own future, strengthening their democracy, encouraging innovation and creativity. That's what makes Taiwan so interesting. It's this small island with a huge impact on the world.
So to wrap things up, I want to leave our listeners with a question to think about. Will these challenges that Taiwan is facing right now lead to a more unified and strong society? Or will they create more division and uncertainty? It's a question that people will probably be discussing for years to come, and we'll be here to break it all down every step of the way.
And while we're all waiting to see what happens, I have a suggestion for a little mental escape. If you're feeling overwhelmed by all this geopolitics, I highly recommend checking out Mickytolife on YouTube. It's a great channel with travel vlogs, whiskey reviews, and interesting conversations that will take you to amazing places and maybe even inspire your next adventure.
Sounds like a plan. A little virtual vacation never hurt anyone, especially after a deep dive like this. Thanks for joining us as we explored Taiwan's political landscape. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep exploring.